Well, it's funny. I'd always followed the Stampede from afar and thought one day I hope to get there. So you know what? We did it. We started with the parade, saw the rodeo. We went to the chuck wagon races and saw the grandstand show that was just phenomenal with music, and then of course the fireworks. And we closed it out with just a wander around the park, and we saw a closing concert. And it was I had a blast. It was really a fun time.
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the Chartered Professional Accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics. I'm Gordon Turtle, your host for this episode, and our guest today is Chartered Professional Accountant Gord Beal, FCPA, FCA, MEd. Gord is the Senior Vice President of Outreach at CPA Alberta. In this role, Gord is responsible for relationship building with post-secondary institutions in the province, overseeing the operations of the CPA Education Foundation, and working to bring accounting and business-related curriculum into the school system. He previously worked at CPA Canada, where he led a team of senior professionals involved in research, technical guidance, and thought leadership development. Gord has joined us to talk about the evolving role of CPAs in today's economy and how CPAs are making contributions to some significant public policy issues in Canada. He'll also be providing a sneak preview about a series of Uncommon Sense episodes that he will be hosting later this fall. Welcome, Gord.
Thanks a lot, Gordon. It's really a pleasure to do this. I appreciate the time.
Well, I have to say I did a little research before recording this episode, and I've learned that never in the history of podcasting throughout the world has there been an episode of a podcast where there are two guests, both named Gordon. So congratulations on reaching this historical milestone with me.
Gord squared.
Yes, that's right. In more ways than one. But Gord, you've got a unique mix of credentials after your name. You're a CPA and also hold a master's degree in education. How did that combination of credentials come about? And how have you used both of those credentials over the course of your career?
Yeah, I guess there's a bit of a story behind that, and I won't bore you with the whole gory details of it. But honestly, for most of my life, I always have had a passion for education. And in the early days, I even really had dreams of teaching. Over my career, I've done some guest lecturing. I've worked with students. I've done a lot of volunteering in the space. I can still even remember when I was first articling with one of the firms when I was becoming a professional accountant, and thinking to myself, it was a late night tax file I was working on, thinking, I'd wanted to be a teacher. Have I made the right choice? And so that sort of was in my mind at the time. But you have to fast forward a number of years after I'd already spent close to 20 years in business. I'd had a really good career, senior financial roles, operations, but always involved in change, involved with, working with people was a big part of my work. And education consistently came up as such a core part of it. Learning, helping people learn was so critical in any kind of a change process. I came to a point in my career where I was, let's just say I was in an organization where I realized that my values didn't exactly align with theirs, and started sort of thinking, okay, what's next for my career, and made a pretty big decision to kind of leave the corporate world, and I honestly went back and got a Bachelor of Education, thinking maybe this is the time to go back and teach. And I did my Bachelor of Education, and even worked in the high school system very briefly, and then had a realization that I really saw a lot of connectivity between education and my CPA and being a professional accountant and the work that I'd done, and so instead of going down that path, I got back into, I worked in the public sector, very much around organizational change and doing work in that space, and I found myself consistently reading about the role that leaders play in organizational learning, the importance of organizational learning in terms of change, and that led me to decide to get my master's. And my master's in education was very much focused on that sort of concept of learning as a core element of how organizations ultimately adapt and change. And that's sort of, that's really the history of how I got into the educational space. And luckily from there, I found myself going down a path of working in the profession. And so one of the pieces I think that really strike me is that it's a core element of being a CPA is the importance of continuous lifelong learning. And that's just a big part of the profession, of course. And I've been able to accomplish some education in the area around education and some advanced academic work. So it's been an interesting journey, and certainly I find myself using both elements consistently in the work that I do, with the good fortune of having of being able to work with the profession.
Well, I think it's probably pretty rare for someone to be able to, seamlessly combine two separate career aspirations, the accounting world and the teaching world, being able to combine those into one kind of career path. So that's pretty cool that you've been able to do that. It must be quite rewarding.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. Yeah, I feel very fortunate. There were times when it was a bit scary because I had to take a bit of a risk on myself. In some ways, some people, in fact, even said, "Why are you turning your back on the accounting profession? Because you've worked so hard to get it." But it really wasn't about that. It was more about embracing new opportunities and looking at where things might take me. And I think that's a reality of our world today, and is that whether you're immersed in traditional financial accounting work or whatever your work might be, I think it's important for us always to keep our eyes open to what the future might bring, and being open to possibilities. So took a bit of a risk, took a bit of a chance, and yeah, to your point, I feel very fortunate that I've been able to blend the two of them.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Gord, your bio mentions your experience in thought leadership development. What is meant by that term, thought leadership, and how can CPAs contribute to thought leadership in their own organizations, regardless of where they're working?
Yeah, it's interesting. Having worked in the thought leadership area for the better part of the last 10 or 12 years of my career, it's interesting. I'd say different people have a slightly different perspective on it, and sometimes maybe what I'm about to say, not everybody will agree with. But foundationally, I'd say that it's the advancement of new ideas and insights, and in advancing those new ideas and insights, inspiring and influencing others to think differently and potentially behave differently as well. I think where I differ from others is that, many would say it's about those big, profound, and inspiring new ideas and the concepts that are really, going to lead to substantial change. I think that's true. And I think it can even be the smaller incremental improvements to existing thinking. And so this is, I think, why it's relevant for not only the organizations out there that undertake really incredible and interesting thought leadership. I think it's relevant for individuals because each of us, as CPAs, non-CPAs, have ideas, and I could say that expertise and a level of expertise in something is something that is often relayed in the context of thought leadership. And expertise can be developed through years of studying. Obviously, the CPA profession, we as CPAs, we're known as experts in the field, but other individuals. But I think, and throughout our career, we continue to learn, and we pick up knowledge, and sharing that knowledge and inspiring others for that change, I think, is a real core element to that. And I think it's important not to be inhibited or constrained with the thought that the only thought leadership is the really big ideas, because even small ideas can help make a big difference.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, for sure. Have you found in your experience that organizations are open to change and new ideas, whether big ideas or small ones? Or is there kind of a built-in institutional resistance to change that can make change and thought leadership difficult to implement?
Yeah, I've seen all of it. I've seen organizations who are very good at embracing change. I've seen individuals, obviously, who are very good at embracing change. I think fundamentally, to some extent, I think we as humans tend to be a little bit afraid of change, perhaps may resist change. And even those of us, and I would put myself into the camp of one who actually looks for change and embraces change, it can create some fear and anxiety. The challenge is in overcoming that. It's funny, I wrote a paper when I was doing my master's that my professor thought was interesting, where I said that even when organizations appear not to be changing, the reality is they are changing. They're adapting, and the world around them, the environment is constantly changing. I mean, in a complex systems environment, we just have to look around us and realize that whether it's the economy or society in general, changes are happening. So for organizations to try to remain the same, they are fundamentally adapting and changing. So what I think is important is that we look at the opportunities where we can advance ourselves, learn, and that goes for both as individuals and I think for organizations.
Excellent. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Gord, I need to give you credit for suggesting that we identify this podcast as not about bean counting, even though it's a CPA podcast. What does it mean to you in 2024 to say that the accounting profession is not only about bean counting? And where are CPAs making their marks these days?
Yeah, we've all, I think most of us who are accountants will have at one point or another in our lives been called bean counters. And, some people make a little bit of fun of it. And, it's the foundations of accounting remain. And, okay, so we're counting beans. And, that often refers to how organizations are, delivering on their performance expectations, and most often that ties to the financial side of things. But I would say today, and it's been happening for some time, but I would definitely say today and going forward, we need to be counting more than beans. We need to be counting more than the financial results. And this is both an opportunity and I would say probably a bit of a challenge for some of our profession. There are many people who are embracing it big time, but it really comes down to, I think, an important time in our history, a bit of a point of inflection, I'd say. The reality is society, stakeholders, people in general are expecting different things of the businesses in which they work, the companies that they invest in, the organizations and companies they buy things from. There are different expectations for performance. We're seeing an increasing amount of expectation that corporations need to demonstrate more value than just profitability and long-term shareholder growth. Although those are not unimportant, those will continue to be important. We're looking at the fact that organizations are being asked to step up and take responsibility for their impact on the environment and their impact on society around them. So what that means is that performance metrics are changing. And so the beans that we're counting, the performance indicators are changing. And as a result, I think the accounting profession is adapting in that context. And it really does bring forward a range of new opportunities for us as a profession. We have a ton of skills and capabilities as it relates to financial information. And, I could go on ad nauseum about the kinds of skills that I believe and competencies that I believe the profession brings in that space. But much of that also applies when you're looking at performance in a much broader context. And that's really what brings it to the point where, we're about more than bean counting. We're counting so much more today. And I think that's just the reality that organizations and leaders of organizations are facing. And the profession is stepping up in that context.
So that leads to my next question, Gord. How is the CPA profession itself adapting to these new performance metrics in organizations and the changing roles being created for CPAs? Is the education and training of new CPAs keeping pace with the skills and knowledge CPAs are being called upon to demonstrate these days?
Yeah, Gordon, that's a huge question, and I would say in a nutshell, yes. I think there's a bit more to it than that. It's interesting. I find myself, and I've spoken on this topic a few times in my career, particularly in the last few years, where I'd say that the accounting profession, and it's interesting, it goes back to one of your other comments earlier about change and about the willingness to embrace new ideas. Some would suggest, and I think it's true maybe to some extent, that accountants are maybe a little bit slow to change, maybe even risk averse and hesitant to embrace the new ideas. And yet, if you look at the whole history of accounting, and it has existed a long time, when we think back to the Pacioli and the origination of the double entry bookkeeping system, very much about how organizations were going to record and demonstrate, the transactional side of the business. Over the centuries, I talk a little bit about the history because over the centuries, the accounting profession has actually stepped up on a number of occasions. When I think into the 1800s during and I'm not a historian, but so it's a layperson's. I'm sure there are great accounting historians out there who could do a much better job of explaining this. But I found myself, reflecting on back in the industrial age when suddenly organizations were being asked to deliver value and were delivering value through capital equipment, heavy-duty capital equipment. Accountants, were effectively there to step up, and accounting adapted in the circumstances to find ways to account for those capital assets that were ultimately the main driver of value and how organizations were using those assets to drive future value. Accounting had to adapt in that circumstance. And you think about it into even in the 2000s, the 1900s. If we go before the 2000s, as there was a greater distribution of ownership versus management, the audit profession really began to emerge in a big way and became very prominent. So there's these points in history, and I would say we're at one of those points in history now. And I give that little bit of background because I do believe that there's two things happening. One is organically, there are CPAs who I know are out there providing leadership. They have been out there looking at this change in the way that organizations are delivering value, the changing in terms of looking at their impact on environment, their impact on society, how value is being driven by more intangible things than ever before. And in that context, there are many CPAs who are learning on their own and stepping up, but the profession is also stepping up. A new competency map was released just less than 2 years ago. Back when I was at CPA Canada, we provide a lot of input on that process, and it very much integrates how important sustainability is as a competency for the CPA. It doesn't mean that the change has happened. It is happening. I think the profession will increasingly integrate the importance of sustainability in the program. So you're seeing universities, I'm talking to universities across the province, all of them are looking for ways to integrate that in their curriculum and their programming. Many of them have standalone, very successful courses that future CPAs and business leaders are taking and learning from. So the change is happening, has been happening, and will continue to happen. And the accounting profession, in my opinion, is ready to step up and really offer value in that space. But there's still a road ahead, and there's still work ahead to get there.
Well, Gord, within this period of great change that you mentioned that we're currently in, is there still a demand in the marketplace for the traditional skills of CPAs, the things we think about, such as tax, audit, financial management, and so on? Are those skills still going to be needed as we go through this period of change and beyond? Come out the other side?
Yeah. Gordon, that's great. I'm glad you brought that up because it's very easy for me to get excited about sustainability and data analytics and technology, and that was a big part of my work when over the last 10 or 20 years is very much looking at that future state. But those core elements of being a CPA, I don't see them going away at all. I think, in fact, will continue to be really critical. If I just simply say that organizations will always need to find ways to sustain themselves financially. They will need financial expertise. Tax, well, I think we've all come to realize tax is here to stay. It's not just a passing fad. So how organizations and individuals ultimately manage tax most effectively, again, CPAs are seen as having an expertise in that space. And of course, the whole finance field, our profession is heavily involved in. But I will say it's how we are involved in that is evolving and changing. Technology is certainly playing an increasingly important role in all that. But that's been the case for my entire career. I've been in this profession for several decades, and I would say from the very beginning, technology has always come along and provided opportunities to change the way we do things. We hear fear of technology replacing jobs, and yeah, you know what? That's true. Technology has always replaced certain elements of what it means to be an accountant. It will replace some of the more, and continue to replace some of the more mundane and repetitive type tasks. But it will not replace the profession. I really believe that, and I think those core areas that you've described will continue to be important. And these new and emerging areas will provide new opportunities for young people who, maybe they don't want to be tax experts. Maybe they don't want to do the debits and credits and the more traditional accounting work. But their knowledge and what they'll learn through the program will enable them to take on these new opportunities, new challenges as well.
So I'm guessing that if a post-secondary student asked you, is it worth becoming a CPA? Is it a good career choice for me these days? Your answer would probably be yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've often reflected on, why did I become an accountant? And in the early days, I was even not sure that I'd made the right choice. I've been lucky. The profession has certainly allowed me some great opportunities and opened some doors for me that wouldn't have otherwise been opened. I honestly think this is one of the best times to be an accountant. I know that's going to sound crazy and probably pretty geeky, but the opportunities that are opening up for us as a profession are really dynamic and very interesting. And I think that individuals, young people who want a profession in accounting, I believe they're going to see things ahead that maybe we don't even realize right now. I think there's going to continue to be new opportunities. Accounting, as I reflect on accounting, I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but it's not just about numbers. It's so much more. And I really, think about even why I became an accountant when I'm asked by young people why should they become an accountant. And it often comes down to what I would say are sort of three things for me. And it's very personal, but at the same time, I'm sure you'll recognize this as well, and other accountants might similarly. I think of transparency, the role that accountants play in making sure that there's a level of transparency, both at the individual level, but certainly at the organizational level when it comes to reporting and that kind of thing. Accountability. Accountability is such an important word, especially today, but I think it always has been, where when people say they're going to do something, we need to hold them accountable, whether they're leaders of corporations or individuals. Is that accountability thing is really, really important. And the last one that is, I think, something that is critical is the trust side of things. So I share all this with you because that's the kind of thing that inspires me, is that the role that accountants play in all of that, and with the world kind of sadly lacking in the foundation of trust, we're having difficulties trusting leaders, we're having difficulties trusting institutions. I think the role of accounting has never been more important than it is today and going forward. And I think that's the kind of thing that I'd like to hear young people get excited about, and that's way more, as I said earlier, way more than bean counting. It's a very dynamic and full of opportunities.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because when people think of accountants, they might think of bean counting and what did you say, geek, that kind of stuff. But they also associate the concept of trust with CPAs. They're trustworthy, they're objective, they're going to tell you the truth. And as one of our previous guests mentioned in a different episode, they bring to the job a sense of professional skepticism that helps kind of see through different obstacles and barriers. So that kind of person, that kind of professional skill set is always going to be needed in organizations, I suspect.
That's a great point, Gordon. It brings a level of credibility, doesn't it? And I think that's where individuals who pursue the profession with the level of expertise, their personal integrity, the trust they can bring to the table. I think they will continue. I think the profession will continue to be respected, and as individuals, they will be respected, and they will have that credibility to make a difference.
For sure. Gord, one of your areas of responsibility at CPA Alberta is to oversee the operations of the CPA Education Foundation, a body that supports accounting education in Alberta in many different ways. It's also the creator and sponsor of this podcast. Can you talk about the foundation and how it is contributing to the ongoing growth and success of the CPA profession in the province?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate to be working with the foundation, and it's been around for it's over 40 years. And Gordon, you also have a very an excellent career where you contributed significantly to the success of the foundation, so I feel in some ways maybe I'm following in your footsteps, trying to live up to the sort of the great history that's been built there already. And the foundation is very exciting for me because it ties back to my passion for education.
Right. Yeah.
I think that education is so foundational to societal changes, and I think it's just embedded in who we are as individuals. And so, the foundation, it's very much about advancing education across Alberta, certainly with a focus on accounting and business. So in that context, it's really very much about supporting the whole ecosystem of education across the province. We invest and contribute over $1 million to the post-secondary institutions across the province, supporting areas of innovation in accounting, as well as faculty recruitment and retention, which of course is always a challenge for post-secondaries. We've got a great opportunity to help students. We have over $180,000 a year that we give out in various student awards to help individuals advance themselves, reach their potential. And we support research. We do events. We share the knowledge that is going on across the academic world here in Alberta. We provide opportunities for academics to display and show the amazing work that they're doing to advance knowledge and education across the province. So it really is, I think, in such a big way, making a difference and helping the process of education that will hopefully attract people and support people that ultimately want to be leaders in business and maybe leaders in the profession, hopefully.
Well, that's fantastic. It's good to know that there is a foundation out there that's doing that kind of work with the focus on business and accounting education. So, congratulations on taking that on. Gord, I know you're quite excited about something else you're working on, which is taking a lead role in a series of episodes of this podcast later this fall. I understand this series is going to focus on the roles of CPAs in the area of sustainability. Before we talk about these podcasts you'll be working on, what do you mean by sustainability? What is your definition of that in the context of the CPA profession?
Yeah, that's sustainability has evolved over the years. When I first got some interest in the space, it would probably be in the early part of my career. I didn't really follow it that closely. It was really through my master's in education where I started reading books, reading articles, gaining an understanding on a concept that at the time was described as corporate social responsibility. So CSR was kind of the term of the day back then. Over the years, it has evolved. Today, sustainability is certainly seems to be the word. That's the word that I personally connect with, and I'll explain that in a second. But also, many of our profession will be familiar with some of the emerging areas of environmental, social, and governance issues, ESG, which is a critical piece of it as well.
And what's ESG?
Yeah, so ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues. So it's how organizations address risks related to those areas and manage those risks and enable themselves to be successful in the context of those areas of environmental, social, and governance issues. So in many ways, that captures the essence of sustainability. But I think sustainability as a word goes beyond, because I mentioned earlier that most organizations, well, all organizations, whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit corporation, financial sustainability is important. How you ensure that you are going to, live and to be able to deliver on what your purpose is as an organization requires financial sustainability. But it goes beyond that, and I have just a really quick story. This began well over a decade ago. I was at an event, a conference in Europe. It was focused, to be honest, it was focused on climate change and at the time talking about sustainability as well. And a CEO of a large multinational European-centric corporation stood up in front of a very large audience, and this particular event hadn't had a lot of corporate individuals there. But this corporate leader, the CEO, said, we cannot call ourselves successful as a corporation, no matter how profitable we are, no matter how much of a return we're providing to our shareholders, unless we are contributing to the society around us and can say that society and the environment in which we are operating is also successful. So it really, for me, hit home about the importance of a broad context for performance and what sustainability means. Is that, the reality is an organization, if it doesn't adequately support the community in which they operate, the society in which they're operating, the people on which they rely, whether it's for employees or customers, I think it's a broader context of how organizations look at success and how they look at how they manage themselves for future success. And so sustainability is a really important concept that we're seeing just totally be embraced in so many ways. We're seeing so many changes recently. We've got the establishment of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board at the international level. It's also, there's been one established here in Canada, which many people would be familiar with. So a lot happening in that space, Gordon, and I'll stop on that because I could probably go on for too long about that right now. And I'm looking forward to being able to talk more about that, you're right, in the podcast series in the fall.
Well, there is certainly a timeliness to that, to introducing those principles of sustainability into the corporate world, and not only a timeliness, but I think you could say even an urgency in doing so. So it's good to hear that it's happening and that the CPA profession is in many ways leading the way in bringing those principles forward.
Gordon, can I I think you just tweaked something for me, and if you don't mind, just offering up here is that one of the things that over the years I and others who have done some work in this space, and you sometimes get criticism about, what's the role of accounting in this, and I've even had some people say, you got to stick to your knitting and stick to the traditional areas that you were describing earlier. But it's interesting. I'm increasingly reading about corporations, organizations who. This isn't about tree hugging. This isn't about saving the world. Although I will say, I think that accountants can save the world, and it's been said by others who are not accountants. The foundation of this is that organizations, to be successful, need to look at risks, need to look at how they manage their organization differently. They are looking more broadly, and that incorporates issues of sustainability. So what's interesting is there are examples of organizations where they have become leaders in terms of sustainability, impact on the climate, reduced impact on the climate. And it didn't start with that. What it started with was doing business better. And how they can do business better. And it involved their finance folks. It involved the accounting folks in terms of the analytical side of things. So it can start differently for different organizations. I'm not saying that some leaders, and I think there are many, and I know there are many examples of CEOs who have said, we're going to be a better organization, and that is what has driven them to do it. There are others who it's being driven on the basis of how do we make sure that our organization sustains itself and is a better performer, and in the process has resulted in enhancements in the way that they are dealing with environmental and social matters. So it's complex, interesting, and certainly a lot of emerging issues in the space.
Based on what you've just said, Gord, can you talk in a bit more detail about what listeners can expect to hear from your upcoming series on sustainability?
Yeah, I think what's there's a couple things motivating me well, aside from the fact that I do have a personal and professional passion for the space, and as I think you've heard me say, certainly feel that it's an important space for the profession to play, I'd say, a significant role in. There are areas of corporate finance. It's how investment decisions are being made. That there's a lot going on, not just in Alberta, in Canada, but internationally in terms of how significant capital allocations are being decided based on a corporation's ability to demonstrate their work in the area of ESG and sustainability. So the finance area, which is an area that our profession plays a significant role in, is one area that certainly we want to explore. When I think about all of the times I've been a controller of a company, I spent 5 years in the automotive industry in finance and operations, and I think of all the times where I implemented internal controls, process improvements, mostly at the time as it related to financial reporting and financial information and that sort of thing. We bring a great amount of skills as a CPA in the business environment to ensure that the organization is gathering the right data, assessing it appropriately, providing a level of assurance that the information can be trusted so that leadership can make decisions about that information. That is very relevant in the sustainability field, because what we don't want is it to just be about a lot of PR stuff and all the great things that the organization is doing. The good companies that are dealing with sustainability are facing the tough questions of how they need to find improvements. And so who better than the CPA in business to make sure that those companies that they're working for are looking at that, are providing, as you mentioned before, Gordon, that professional skepticism, saying, is what we're saying here real? If we say this out in the public eye, are we going to be held accountable later? And if we can't live up to that, how does that look on us? If we're accused of what people would describe as greenwashing, where, maybe they're just saying it because they think it's a good thing to say. Oftentimes it's just about being aspirational, but the accountant can provide that skepticism. So there's that opportunity to talk about, and I will talk with individual who is in the business environment and who's establishing appropriate processes. And what's really interesting is I take it to the last piece of what I want to do with this is to profile that there are some amazing CPAs out there, Alberta CPAs, who are doing some great work in the area of sustainability. And that work they're doing is not only impacting Alberta themselves, their own organizations, it's impacting Canada, it's having international impact. So I'm quite excited about meeting with a few Alberta CPAs who have demonstrated some real leadership in the sustainability space. In the CPA space, but also definitely in the sustainability space. So, that's kind of it in a nutshell without getting into too much detail, but maybe that's already more detail than you wanted, Gordon.
No, that's great. I mean, those are going to be some very interesting episodes of our podcast for sure. So thank you so much for that sneak peek, Gord. Based on what I've heard from you today, I'm pretty sure you're going to be a fantastic podcast host. Although I hope you're not too fantastic, because I kind of like doing it myself. And Gord,
oh, you're very kind. You've been very good to me.
Well, thanks, Gord, for being our guest for this episode. You've painted a compelling and engaging picture of the CPA profession today and in the coming years, and it's been eye-opening to hear about the directions the profession is moving in. Thank you for sharing your insights today.
Gordon, it's been a real pleasure. I like talking about this. Maybe I talked too much about it, but it was fun to do this with you. And thank you very much for the time, and I really enjoyed it.
The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshe. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshie CPA Knowledge Centre, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.